What's up everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is Rosendo. We have another video for you today, this time taking a look at my open format mix. Now some of you might be thinking it doesn't really make sense to break down a mix, but there's a lot that goes into all of my mixes that I really want to share and kind of highlight. And again, the reason I do all of this is hopefully to inspire all of you when you're making your own mixes or making your own tracks. So breaking down some of my thought processes and how things kind of went when I was making this mix will hopefully inspire people on, some of the creative decisions, some of the impulsive decisions, and really at the end of the day, how I put together a mix and maybe how it might change how you put together a mix. So first things first, let's talk about my open format mix. Now this is not the first open format mix I've released. It's actually the second. The first one I made a long time ago when I was new to DJing. So I didn't really have a lot of, not only a sense of kind of who I wanted to be as a DJ, but kind of what open format really even meant. It was just kind of a mix of where I played just almost party music and just kind of posted it. As I kind of started listening to other DJs and really understood what open format really meant and saw how other DJs did open format and kind of got an idea of, I like what this DJ does, but I don't really like what this DJ does. This is for me, this is not for me. How would I have done this differently? And as I started actually DJing gigs, full rooms, empty rooms, crowds that responded to certain stuff, crowds that didn't respond to other stuff, I kind of got an idea of what open format meant, what I wanted to, or I guess what I should say is not only what open format meant, but how I wanted to portray open format, because everyone does it a little bit differently. And that's really what this mix is about, because again, the first open format mix I posted was, it was like a demo mix, kind of 45 minutes to an hour, really just to, be able to send to clubs and bars and say, hey, this is kind of how I DJ, just so you have a mix available to reference kind of what I do. Fast forward a few years, we are in 2024, and I was kind of starting to reconsider my identity as a DJ almost, for two reasons. Number one, I started to realize back in the past, I was almost kind of really blended between being a DJ and a producer, and I would focus a lot on DJing and I wouldn't really focus a lot on producing. And it kind of took away from the producing side of things, and it really made me a little bit just kind of unsure of how I wanted to be a DJ, or kind of even if I wanted to be a DJ. But even now, I was a little bit more sure that I'm not a DJ first, I'm a producer first. And that was the most important realization for me, because DJing really came second, right? Open format is something that was kind of in the back of my mind when I thought about picking up DJing, because I liked electronic music so much, and my vision of DJing was, maybe one day I'll have a house set, one day I'll do a mix with the artist, just kind of DJing electronic music. And then I realized that DJing, that's not all that DJing is. DJing is actually a lot of open format, depending on where you are, right? Obviously, if you're at festivals, if you're a big headliner, you can do whatever you want. But if you're like a normal DJ that's just playing bars, clubs, you're pretty much open format, right? You're playing whatever the crowd wants. You're there to just read the crowd, create an atmosphere, and play to some extent what's popular. Now, I know I'm getting off track, real quick to get off track one more time. The other reason I wanted to make this video is because hopefully some of you have realized based off seeing my videos, one of the things I really like to do is ask why, not necessarily ask why, but ask why in my own life and kind of break down the whys behind things. Not only in the tracks I make, but pretty much in everything I do. So I really like to share kind of the thought, again, like I said, the thought process of what I do and how I do what I do, to hopefully be able to ask yourself why you do things and maybe decide on what type of DJ or artist you want to be. So again, I really wanted to just break down the details and get into the specifics of this mix, because there are a lot of things that I would like to say about not only this mix, but everything I create, that I feel like I just wouldn't get a chance to say otherwise unless I made a video about these things. So that's why I really like breaking down my tracks. That's why I want to break down this open format mix. And that's why I want to continue doing these videos, hopefully for the long term. Now, after that ramble, let's talk about this actual open format mix. Anyways, why did I make this? I think I mentioned I made this for two reasons, and I already lost track of what those reasons were. In any case, the reason I made this mix specifically is because once I started to realize that I was more of a producer rather than a DJ, I did want an open format mix that kind of resembled me, because the open format that kind of existed out there in clubs, that a lot of clubs and bars want, wasn't really what I liked as an artist, as a producer. And I realized that was okay, that's okay. So I wanted to make an open format mix that really represented what I would do as a DJ. And kind of think, hey, no holds barred. My thought process making this mix was, you know what, if I were in a club with my eyes closed, you know, I didn't have to think about the crowd at all, what would I mix? And I've done gigs where you're kind of trying to read the crowd, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't. But I've always found that my best performances, not only the ones that I enjoy the most, but the ones that the crowd seems to enjoy the most, are the ones where I'm not even thinking about the crowd. I'm just doing what I do best, playing songs that I know work well together, creating an energy, creating some movement throughout the night. And those are just the most memorable nights I have versus the times where I'm thinking, all right, what does the crowd want to hear? What do they think I should play? What do I think they want me to play? Right? Things like that. It always went best when I didn't even think about the crowd at all. Put my head down and just started, you know, looking through my tracks, looking through my library, focusing on what I was doing in the moment, and really just living, you know, on that stage or wherever on those decks. So again, my thought process going into this mix was, if I were in a bar, I knew there was a crowd, right? I knew I had to create some energy, but I wasn't looking at the crowd at all. I couldn't see them. They didn't care what I played. I didn't care what they wanted to hear, and I just did my own thing. That is how this mix was born, and that's how I wanted this mix to be, really just a representation of who I am and what I do and how I do what I do. So let's get to it. Let's talk about the mix itself now. First things first, the description in this on Mixcloud actually limits your characters. I didn't know that when I was writing the description at the time. So I actually have a longer version of this description that I do want to break down, that I have it right here. I kind of made a draft of it, and then from there I just kind of had to trim it down in a shorter version that you see right here and that you see on Mixcloud. So let's talk about a few things, because I mean, I crafted these words carefully and intentionally, like I do with a lot of the things I do. I mean, intention is one of my signature characteristics, if you will. Not only in my tracks, but in my mixes, although that changes slightly, as I'll mention in a second. So let's take a look at what I did, because again, everything is super carefully crafted to accurately portray to really capture, I should say, what this mix is, the essence of this mix. Because it really is a glimpse into my mind, into my style and execution. And I really do see myself as an artist, and I do try to carefully craft my sets. Obviously, when I'm in the moment, you know, it's not necessarily careful, but it is intentional. It is kind of really being, you know, thinking about the options and trying to do what you think is best in the moment, not just playing whatever comes next in your library, or whatever you feel like playing next. And most importantly, everything that's very important is in bold. This open format mix is meant to serve as an accurate representation of how I would DJ an open format night live. Again, if I didn't have to worry about the crowd, if I just closed my eyes and just had some fun, just did whatever it was that I wanted to do. So let's highlight some of the notable features. Number one, genre and track selection. Track selection is king. This becomes priority over all else. What does that mean? That means that as a DJ, the songs you have in your library say a lot more and mean a lot more than anything you do on the decks. And I think that's important. I think that's key. Your job as a DJ, and well, I also see this job as an artist, is to have a collection of songs. How do you decide which songs you want in your library? You know, there are going to be the songs that you enjoy that you want in your library. There are going to be songs that you enjoy and that you like that you don't want in your library. There are also going to be songs that you don't necessarily like or enjoy that you would have in your library. Let's say something's really trendy or something's really popular right now. You might have those songs even though they're not to your taste. So again, I would strongly argue that the tracks you have in your library, not just genre-wise, but the specific tracks you have, say a lot more about who you are as a DJ than anything you do in the moment. So let's talk about this first point. This open format mix features a wide variety in genres. Now this is pretty true. These first three ring true pretty hard, with an emphasis on pop. I would consider, I mean, you see right here, I would actually say, depends on your definition, that I play a lot of throwbacks, but that's just because I play a lot of pop that isn't restricted to a certain range. Definitely not restricted to what's popular right now. I mean, I play songs of all time spans. I really liked the music of the 2010s, you know, and the early 2000s. I'm going to play a lot of those, right? And those were pop tracks in the time, so I wouldn't necessarily label them as throwbacks. It's really just pop that was, you know, that has no time restrictions on it, that has no time year restrictions on it. Electronic, I'm an EDM guy. I love EDM. I will play it not just because I like it, but because I do think it's good music that fits a lot of vibes. Same thing with house. Easygoing, I love house. This might be a little bit more biased because I'll play a house when I have the chance because I like it. But again, I still think it fits the vibe a lot of the time. The occasional Latin. I wouldn't consider myself a Latin DJ. I'm definitely not a Latin artist. but I like Latin music, reggaeton and other Latin songs that aren't reggaeton but are also popular, like Danza Kuduro, like a lot of Daddy Yankee tracks. I'm a really big fan of. Even some of Bizarrap, who's a newer artist, I really like to play, some of his popular tracks. And the less occasional hip hop. Actually, I fill in the gaps a lot with hip hop, so I wouldn't really consider myself a hip hop artist at all, or a hip hop DJ at all, or really kind of a fan of hip hop. But I did listen to a lot of hip hop back in the day. And again, I almost like to use it to fill in some gaps. So it is definitely there, but not in a very caught up and, kind of I know what's going on in the hip hop scene type of way. It's really just whatever track I like, whatever tracks I used to listen to. Those will be in there, thrown in, again, usually to bridge some gaps, which we'll get to when we actually break down the mix. Again, music is not limited to any time span. Track selection is king. This all could be taken out of here completely, and this first point would still be the most important thing. It would still be representative of who I am as an artist and as a DJ. Number 2, slow and steady. Now we're getting into a little bit of the characteristics of how I DJ, not just kind of what I have in my library, but how I do things. Right, I do believe music is an art, and I hate when tracks are played, too short, and we don't really get to listen to them and enjoy them. Tracks are left to play and develop on their own with an average play time of about 2 minutes per track. I've been DJing for a while, and I found that that's pretty universally true, and no matter, maybe that depends on the genre, but whenever I DJ, no matter if I'm doing open format, no matter the night, no matter what, what the crowd is like, I have found, and I've crunched some numbers, that is kind of my average time. And I love that. I think that's so nice that you really let each track play out and you let each track progress. There's another one of my signature characteristics. You let each track progress, kind of maybe rise up, come down, and maybe rise up again before you go to the next one, instead of always having everything at the peak on and on, right? So the tracks are left to play out. Things kind of develop slowly. I'm not scared to do, transitions where things drop and then things come back up instead of always having everything in your face. All with little to no emceeing or addition of effects. I don't think I've ever emceed when I've kind of DJ live, and I'm pretty confident. I think I can say that pretty confidently. I've never picked up the mic, and that I can say confidently, that I've never picked up the mic and said, everyone hands up, or 1, 2, 3, or everyone jump, things like that. So even effects, I like to add effects sometimes. I don't mess around with effects that much, so I don't have a lot of practice on when would be a good time to add effects. But because I don't, and I'm not a big fan of them, I can say that there's very little effects, and I don't really like to change around the tracks too much, adding risers and sweepers and flangers and all that stuff. And because track selection is king, Rosendo leans towards original tracks and less on remixes and mashups. This is absolutely true. I play a lot of original tracks. When we get into the electronic music, I do kind of include some remixes and mashups, and especially when I'm at, 128 BPM. This isn't necessarily true of my artist sets. Remember, everything I do here is a representation of open format. Nowadays, as of June 27th, 2024, whenever I do specific artist sets, which means I do what I do as my artist, Rosendo, playing electronic music, I've actually been kind of, remixes have been growing on me a lot more. When I'm doing drum and bass sets, or if I ever try to, right now, maybe I'll start preparing like a mid-tempo set or a dubstep set. That's when I'll probably like to include some remixes. But when it comes to open format, original tracks, in my opinion, are, not even in my opinion, original tracks are what I go to, right? I like original tracks. I think those tracks made it big for a reason, right? Tracks that have, I really like to choose tracks that have several hundred millions of streams because everyone knows them. And throwing a remix in there, I just feel like sometimes kills the momentum you have of people recognizing the track but not really know how it's going, or not really know how it's going to go. But again, that's just my opinion. That's just how I do things. I play a lot of original tracks. I know some DJs almost exclusively play remixes. I'm not one of them. Long-term progression, a fundamental characteristics of my sets. Progression both in the short term and the long term. This is, again, everything, it just makes me so happy to talk about, my passion, which is music. And these two just go hand in hand so perfectly because it really just does represent who I am. I really wish I could include this in the Mixcloud description, but because I can't, I just had to make a video on it and share with the world that this is one of the characteristics I strongly believe in, and if it's something that you think could help your sets, definitely try it out. I'm not afraid to bring the energy up and down in the short term as long as everything has the direction, but let's talk about this progression both in the short term and the long term. My open format sets go a very specific way. I start at low BPM. I take it to 128, stay at 128 for a while. I take it up, go climbing 130s, 135, 140s. And then I get to, let's say, 150, where you have the BPM, putting you at, what did that put you at? That puts you at about 75. And then you take 75 BPM tracks and you keep going back up all the way to 128. You finish the night at 128. So again, everything is just, it's so based on the long term. Everything's so intricately crafted when I'm in the moment and I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to be playing this track and maybe I'll stay at 128 for an hour. And then, once things are kind of, getting stale, that's when you bring things back up. I very rarely jump from BPMs, going from 128 to, let's go straight into reggaeton and switch it to 90 BPM. I don't think I've probably done that once or twice, but I hardly ever do that. If I didn't have to look at a crowd, I would make everything have a direction. Now, this progression isn't just limited to BPM. It's comes down to track selection as well, which is why track selection is king, right? When I'm selecting tracks to play next, I'm always thinking, does this track have, let's say, low energy, medium energy, or high energy? And I'm kind of going from low, medium, high, medium, low, and kind of everything goes like a wave, like a sine wave. And everything kind of has a direction, and not even just the tracks, but the whole night kind of goes from low, medium, high, back to medium, going to low to medium, and then high again. Everything kind of, again, as long as everything has a direction, I'm not afraid to bring the energy up and down, and you'll hear it in the mix. We'll get into it in a second. And again, I do strongly believe that this is going to be the difference between my sets and all the other sets. This is not a hard rule I follow, but I do think that if sets don't have a direction, you could be a headlining artist that is super famous and super popular that's playing at the biggest music festival. But if the set doesn't have some sort of direction, it doesn't really stand out. I think I can confidently say it doesn't stand out from what the next artist is playing. And I think I strongly believe that if your set does have a direction, it's going to be a good set. It's going to be at least a better set than what the next person is playing. So much so that I think all sets should have some sort of direction, right? It should be moving towards something. It should have something to it that is going to make it memorable. That's going to make it a good set instead of just playing tracks back to back and not really, having a why behind it. Right. So versus a conventional set where everything is all high energy always, a lot of open format DJs really just have to, go banger after banger after banger, which is fine, and it definitely works. It works really well if you're in the right crowd, if you're really just in a bar where everyone's just there to go crazy. Those work. That's not the setting I'm aiming for, at least not with my type of sets. If my sets work in that type of crowd, I would love it. So versus a conventional set where everything is high energy, I'll introduce a dynamic element, the highs and lows in the form of track selection. So not only in long-term progression, but in form of track selection, as I mentioned. Long-term progression is an essential, again, in my opinion. Introducing peaks and troughs throughout the night, as I mentioned, culminating in a finale that is sure to make the set a memorable one. Real quick sidebar, I really like when I know what time I'm ending at a bar or a club. If I'm like, hey, 1:45 sharp, lights are turning on, I like that because that way I know, all right, last 5 minutes or last 10 minutes, I'm going to go in this direction and end it right here. And again, that's kind of the artist in me coming out and really wanting to end on the perfect moment versus when I'm in the moment and I'm in the groove and all of a sudden the lights turn on because the bar just decided, all right, you know what, it's good enough time as ever to just, call it and, turn the lights on and end the night. So I really like when the nights are when I know what time my set is ending because, again, I do try to make that ending really intentional where I, have some tracks that I already know I want to play for the last 5-10 minutes and make everything move in a direction. All right, and finally, because I see myself as an artist, you're right, music is more than just, an energy catalyst, quite literally. It's not just something that you can use to bring the energy to the party and to the dance floor and have people dancing, but it is a form of art, so I do want to kind of make sure other DJs and other artists also think the same way, to think of music, hey, we're not just, trying to have some fun, which even though we are, but we're making a set, we're crafting something, we're making art here. And I do strongly believe that. All right, now this has gone on for long enough. Why don't we actually get into the open format mix, because I spent too much time talking, but hopefully that just allows you to see how passionate I am about what I do and, trying to be really, really intentional with all these things. Speaking of intention, before we go into this, I do want to say that this mix was not necessarily crafted live, and it wasn't crafted super intentionally careful and weighing out all the options. But what I did do here is I sat down with my laptop, not even my decks, just my laptop, and I played a song. I like starting with Holy Grail. So I play a song and I just see, if I were live, what would I play next? I'm scrolling. I'm like, you know what? I would definitely play that next. I'm scrolling out thinking I would definitely play that next. And I play these songs. I see how the transition is. Even if it's like a rough transition that I can hear it there, I'm like, yeah, there, that's the track list right there. So I play a song. Again, I didn't make it live, but I didn't really sit down and write down, you know what, this is good. What are all my possible options? You know what, I have these 5 options here. Let's listen to all of them. Let's play the tracks out and see which one works. No, I just kind of really did it. This is meant to represent how I DJ live, so I took that seriously. I sat down with my laptop. I played a track. I go through the similar tracks, which I'm sure all DJs use. If you're a DJ, you know what I'm talking about. Similar BPM, similar key, and I'm like, you know what, I'll play that one. If there's nothing there, I go through my collection. I'm like, you know what, if I were live, I would definitely play that one next. And last thing is, I am very confident that this is an accurate representation, even if I didn't do it live on my decks in the moment. So let's get into it. Holy Grail. I love starting with this track. I would probably start with this track half the time if I could. Of course, things would get stale, and I would be tempted to move it in this exact same direction. But I really like this as a starting track. I also like going into What You Say. These 2 tracks really make a really good... Sorry, I'm getting so passionate just thinking about the movement that goes on here. But these 2 tracks do a really good job of setting the tone, of setting the mood, and letting us know where we're going to be. Holy Grail starts off slow, and when it goes into that chorus, you kind of know what you're getting yourself into. Going into What You Say, which is a throwback, but we're just going to consider this pop, which is a pop song that has that movement. It's recognizable, and it's not too high energy, but it's just the right amount of energy that you start off strong, but not too strong that when you go down, it feels like you really just took a dive bomb. And this track, I really suggest you listen to this, by the way, if you haven't. It's really good just play in the background for, a party or anything that you just want background music on. But off the top, you kind of see this direction going where you start off with Holy Grail that has, I would call it like a medium energy track, but because of the intro, again, track selection is king. It starts off soft and it takes you into a slightly high energy, so you can maybe average it out at medium. What You Say is kind of high, and then the bottoms up transition just works so well to bring it down into an area where you know what to expect because the energy's already been high with these first 2 tracks. But we brought the energy down a little bit. We bring it down more into a milli, and it gives us a good foundation to build up to, right? Starting with these solid tracks that work their way down and give us a foundation starting at a milli. Then you're going to see a lot of hip hop here. Again, I like to use hip hops as the bridge, and because hip hop is so, it has high BPM, low BPM, high energy, low energy, it does a really good job of kind of paving the way for what's to come next. I'm a big fan of Spanish music, so I went to some Spanish music next, some more popular things. And again, I don't like jumping back and forth, so if I'm playing some genre and then I go into Spanish music, I'm going to let that play for, a few songs at least, just to really let it sink in, especially if this is something you're going to do for open format where you're doing 4, 5, 6 hours, let it sink in, let people enjoy that moment, even if it's just for 10 minutes. It'll come, it'll go, and over the course of 6 hours, 10 minutes is not long at all. Now, real quick, before I forget, I do want to mention that I'll be listening to this just to remind myself what's going on, but obviously there won't be any music playing because of copyright. All right, now if you're unfamiliar with these Spanish tracks, they're on the slower side, which I like, and going into Rude Boy by Rihanna picks that velocity up just a little bit, picks the pacing up. After you start strong, you go into these medium tracks, right? Spoil My Night, Shake It Up, you're getting a little bit of a groove. You bring it down with some of these tracks, and you slowly bring it back up with Rude Boy into Just a Dream. I really like playing this track. It's one of my favorites, not only to play, but just in general. So I really like this track. Unstoppable by Sia. I really like playing this track a lot. Even something like Boom Clap, which are super poppy. They're super kind of, I want to say 2014 poppy. But I like playing them. They just have a good feeling when you play them live and you're trying to make a direction going the long term. Eventually moving on to things like Cold Water, another track that's super poppy but I really like. And picking up the pace a little bit with, some Major Lazer that I actually play. I played quite a bit in this track. And right now we're in about, let's say, the 90 BPM range or so going into here. Right, we even have some old tracks. I don't have a lot of older tracks, let's say 70s, 80s, 90s. In my playlist, but the ones I do, I like to play, especially when you're in an open format mix. I don't play them all that often in an open format setting, but sometimes I wish I did play them more often. So we go into those. We go into One Dance, which has a reggaeton type beat and goes really well into Bumaye. If you've heard the mix, you kind of know what to expect there. Into right some here again, this is a good example of where things just kind of felt right and where it kind of felt like I was doing things live, because right here isn't the most carefully crafted moment, but it just felt right, and I was just kind of doing what I wanted to do, going from I want to say 80s or 90s into one dance, into a Latin song, back into 80s and 90s, and then into hip hop. Again, this is a good example of how it's not carefully crafted, but it just felt right. It was in the moment, and it's not like I said, or you know what, now I have to stick with an 80s theme, so let me write down all my 80s, 90s songs and play them all at once, and then do that and that. This is pretty close to what I would do live. Anyways, you'll notice that this entire time the BPM is just building up, starting at, I want to say it's around 75. So I think what you say is at 72 or so. And you're slowly bringing it up. Reggaeton is usually in the 80s or 85s, maybe 90s. Bringing it up here, getting into some hip hop that actually puts you around 124. And that's when I like to put that to the side and get into, at least in my opinion, the good stuff. Middle Child into Wet is a really good transition, because you let Middle Child play out, you hear it kind of ends, and the Wet intro comes in, which, if you're unfamiliar with Wet, it kind of starts, it just starts, right? Not with the drums, but with an intro, very little sound, and it goes into the drop, which allows me to switch into some house music. Again, where I am biased. This is a lot of house, but I love house. I'm going to play if I get the chance. If I didn't have to worry about a crowd in front of me and I could just close my eyes, this is what I would do. I would play, house for a bit and then move on. But I mean, you have some Fisher. I really like these tracks. Rufus Du Sol and Hayden James. Are you kidding me? And then we get back into the pop, right? I mean, I would love playing these artists more, but I always have to worry about a crowd. Then we get back into the pop. Sugar is a really good track. If you're a DJ and you don't have this track, well, again, it's lower energy, so I'm not sure how many DJs would like to play it. But I think it's a really good track, especially if you're kind of trying to bridge that gap between pop and electronic music, which I do all the time. Sugar is one of my go-tos. It is lower energy though. And then you get into the kind of the heart of the night. You're approaching 128. I think I reached 128 right around here or so. But this is where you play some of the tracks that I play a lot when I'm live. I mean, I would say 75% of the time, maybe even 90% of the time, I'll play these tracks, right? Even Time of Our Lives, I think, is a really, really good bridge from that 124 to relaxed stuff to the 128. It picks up the pace just enough to allow you to go into things like Hello, Scream. I mean, Evacuate the Dance Floor is already high energy. But again, some of these tracks I'll play all the time. I really like Hello. I love this track. I love Evacuate the Dance Floor as well. And these are tracks I'm going to play a lot, even if there were a crowd or if there were no crowd. All right, moving on. This is where we actually get into some remixes. I am a fan of some remixes. This is kind of that high energy 128 stuff that I like to play. When we're in the peak of the night, it's still early, but we're in the peak of the energy at least. You get all these tracks. We're gonna get into some of my signatures in a second. Not signatures because they're not my tracks, but some of the tracks that I'll almost always play. I like playing these. Again, we're at 128. Where Have You Been does a really good job of bridging pop with EDM. So does Give Me Everything. These two, I would say, even I Love It kind of. But these two I would definitely play, I think, like 90% of the time. Give Me Everything is played all the time when I DJ. I really like these tracks. If you're a DJ, you know how well these tracks work. But again, we're at 128, right? The night is moving forward. In the Dark by Dev, I think, is an underrated track. A lot of EDM here that I would love to play if I never had to worry about a crowd ever. This is one of my favorite moments right here. You go from In the Dark to Take Over Control to Blame. And that outro into You Are My Life is a good example of how I would do things as a DJ, just playing the music I love if I were live and did not have to worry about a crowd. This is one of my favorite songs, and I would probably never play this live because I know that the crowd would not want something so... I mean, it's such a euphoric track that I love listening to, and I probably wouldn't play it live because it wouldn't make a lot of sense. I guess I should say I wouldn't play in an open format setting because it wouldn't make a lot of sense. But in that moment, it just felt like the only thing I wanted to play when I was, again, sitting down my laptop. I'm like, all right, Take Over Control. All right, Blame is a good transition. And I couldn't resist but queuing up You Are My Life. And once I queued it up, if I did it live, it was in there, right? I can't, change my mind and be like, you know what, scratch that. I'm going to play a different track instead. It was in there, and that's the only thing I wanted to hear in that moment. And to be clear, right, going from all this high energy into kind of this peak moment of You Are My Life where you don't really have that same dance energy, but you have that euphoric energy, does a really good job of hitting that reset button taking you straight. I mean, this transition right here is amazing. You Are My Life into Barbra Streisand just does a great job of hitting reset and taking you back into the moment, right, with Barbra Streisand. Let's Get Loud is a really good track here that also changes things up and transitions really well into a kind of almost not that heavy, but a very specific Spanish section. Right, this track is a very unique track I found on SoundCloud that I played in the moment. Pretty good Latin house track. Into Bizarrap. This is a super popular track that I don't know how well it fits an open format style, but I like the track. It's a good track to listen to, and if I like listening to the track, sometimes I'll just play it. Into some really good tracks here. Danzakuduro is really good. Limbo is another really good track that it's not as recognizable to a general population as Danzakuduro is, but I'd say it still has pretty similar energy, and it's a really good track to play at pretty much whatever moment that Danzakuduro is appropriate. All right, and speaking of impulsive decisions, right, Limbo into Summer, in the moment when I was doing this and I was playing Limbo and I decided to go into Summer, I heard a drop swap and I decided to send it. I said, you know what, if I were live, it would be very risky to do live, and I'd probably hold back if I were live. But again, if I knew there was no crowd and there was no repercussions if I messed up, I would have done that drop swap live, and I included it in the mix because it's something that I would have been, bold enough to do if I wasn't so cautious whenever there's a crowd listening to what I'm doing, and so careful not to mess up. So this Limbo to Summer drop swap I think is super fun in the track. Leading into some tracks that I also really like to play. Glamorous is a fun track to play. The Walker I don't think I've ever played live, but because I'm just doing my own thing, I really like this transition. I like The Walker. It's a great track, and it worked really well into Boogie Wonderland that I actually think fit the vibe and fit the moment, where at that point we transition from 128 probably right around here, and we're bringing the pace up, and you're seeing that I'm bridging that gap with some hip hop, right? Hip hop, because it spans such a wide BPM, it does a good job of taking me from where I am to where I need to be, which in this case is trying to get from, let's say, 135 BPM down to up to like 150 again, so I can reset that BPM, which is what we get to kind of right here. Some hip hop right here, I really like. I like it by Cardi B and Bad Bunny. I think it works really well live. I don't think it's ever not worked live. Carousel, Life Goes On. I'm not a big fan of Rumble, but it just felt right to play in the moment. I like listening to it, and it just kind of it really interrupts things in kind of a way that I really like. When you hear the intro of Life Goes On and the track's kind of dying out, right? You get all this high energy into the outro. Sorry, I should say, of Life Goes On. And things are dying out. Rumble is played to kind of give the whole mix some space, kind of let things breathe a little bit, which works perfectly into the intro of Monaco by Bad Bunny. Now, this is something that I kind of do sometimes, where I have this moment of the night where things really just kind of take a standstill, and that allows you to build things back up. But that standstill is super important because, I mean, if you're always high energy the entire night, not only is there no standstill, there's no room to breathe, but again, things don't have a direction, and when things don't have a direction, I think things just get boring and things aren't really memorable. So there's a nice standstill from the end of Rumble into the intro of Monaco, and when you hear those violins, you just know that kind of, all right, this is your chance to collect yourself before something is about to happen, which is why I labeled this part 2, where I really like what's going on here, right? This is actually one of my favorite kind of progressions that I've made. Going from Monaco to Walk It, Talk It to Don't Let Me Down, I mean, I think is such a good track, but because it's so soft and so slow in some areas, it just wouldn't be played live. But hearing that drop, especially the second drop of Don't Let Me Down, where it's a little bit more euphoric, into No Sleep by Wiz Khalifa, straight into Pretty Girl Rock, that movement there is just, I would say it's iconic. It's just so good in that moment, leaning into the second half of this mix. Where we get Paper Planes, one of my favorite songs, doesn't work that well live. At least I don't think so if there was a crowd, but I'm not worrying about that. I like Paper Planes. I played it. Umbrella is one of my more signature tracks that I play all the time when I'm live. Into another really good Spanish area. This is another one of those areas where I didn't think at all about kind of what if there was a crowd, because El Perdón works well. I actually really like the Umbrella into El Perdón transition. I think it, again, sets the tone really well to go into some more Spanish music. Into Dirty Love, one of my favorite tracks that it's I know it's a little bit more emotional. It has a little bit more kind of oomph to it in an emotional sense, not in a high energy sense. And I would love nothing more than to play this track more often live, play this track live more often. But because it doesn't really fit an open format type setting, I don't play it all that often. I'm really glad I included this track and other tracks like even something like Don't Let Me Down, You Are My Life. I'm really glad I included some of those more euphoric and emotional tracks as opposed to everything high energy always. Then you have some more normal Latin music, Lo Que Pasó Pasó, Oye Mi Canto, Rakata, which is almost always works really well live. It's one of the more recognizable and good energy reggaeton songs that'll be played a lot by reggaeton DJs and maybe even some open format DJs. Into Unforgettable is a really good transition. I'm going to break down some of my favorite transitions here at the end. But in any case, we're going into Uproar, into Staying Alive that I also really like. Again, things are just kind of in the moment. Hypnotize is one of my favorite tracks and probably doesn't work at all in an open format setting. But I liked it, so I played it. The bass lines actually clash quite a bit. So this is one of those areas where you can tell it wasn't super calculated and super careful because the transition, at least in my opinion as a DJ, is slightly rough. I would actually say it's pretty rough. But in the moment, this is what I wanted to go to. I was hearing Staying Alive, when I was crafting this on my laptop, and I could just hear Hypnotize being played next, so I went into it. Into Say My Name, which I love. Odessa is just such a good artist. And then we get a little bit more house. Pushing On, Houseology, also bridges that gap, which real quick, when we hit the reset button, we're probably, I want to say, around the 80 BPM mark, slowly bringing it up into the 90s, into the 100s, 110s, and at this point, we're about the 124s. Raise Your Glass, I don't play all that often because I haven't played it enough to know if it works live or not, but I think it should work live in the right moment, and I'm curious to know if it works live more often. So if you're an open format DJ and you play this regularly, let me know how it works because this is one of the tracks I would like to include more. I'm just unsure of how well it would work, so I usually refrain from playing it in the first place. I've probably played it like once or twice in the right moment and it works. But I haven't played it more often than that. And then we get back into the 128 BPM. Feel So Close is another one of my signature tracks. I play this all the time. Again, pop EDM bridge works really well, super recognizable, and because it has an intro, good outro, it can pretty much be played at any moment. Into some more mashups, right? Here we get some very impulsive electronic music stuff that, again, as an EDM fan, I play this as I like. Nothing Holding You Down is a really good mashup by Seeing Double into a Pompeii Audion remix that I decided to drop swap with a Jason Ross remix of Rebound. Super electronic track, definitely not recognizable by the mainstream population. But again, I just really wanted to listen to it in the moment, and it just made sense to play. So we get into a lot of EDM stuff right here. We have Pompeii Audion remix. Pompeii is definitely recognizable. I'm not sure how recognizable the Audion remix is. And in the moment, I heard a drop swap, so I sent it and decided to include a drop swap in there. Not only that, but in the moment, this is one of those areas where it was slightly careful but slightly impulsive, where I wouldn't have done this live, but I could have done it live. That's actually exactly how I would describe this moment. When I went into that Rebound Jason Ross remix drop swap and I heard the drop playing, I could hear an acapella in the back of my head. If I were doing it live, I wouldn't have enough time to load something up and to, in that moment, to see what works and hit play and make sure I have the right spot aligned. But when I was playing this and I was crafting it on my laptop and I went from Pompeii, I heard a drop swap. You know what? Let's drop swap. Sure, that works. Let's keep it there. And you know what? I hear an acapella. I did have to kind of take a step back and think, you know what? This is something that I could play live. I just wouldn't have done it in that very moment. But I want to include it because it would represent how I would do it live. This is actually something I might do more often now that I know it works, right? If I know I'm going to go into Rebound, I could have a live queued up, the acapella by Cruella, I should say, and I would definitely play that live. So again, one of those moments where it's not really kind of super live and super, impulsive, and it is scaled down a little bit, but as I said earlier, it's not something that I would have done live in that moment, but it's something that I could have done live in that moment, and that I would do live in that moment. And then you kind of get to this outro, and this is one of those things I was talking about where it's nice to know when you're going to end because you can pick the right tracks. I mean, the Solo just does a really good job of resetting after the end of such a heavy, high-energy track, which is Rebound, especially that second drop of the Jason Ross remix, if you recognize it, where it goes from 128 kick on every beat to, I believe it's a just kick on one beat and then snare on the third. So Solo does a really good job of kind of putting that EDM in the past, getting back into the pop, and leading into the intro. Solo is a really good track that has that emotion. I always like to end with emotion. I think that just makes a really good good ending to a night. So Solo has the right amount of emotion here, and we take some pretty big BPM jumps, but the other reason I wanted to include all of these tracks is because these are some of my signature tracks that I like to end nights with. Maybe not the entire night, but somewhere near the end, I'll play these tracks. So I did want to include them as a representation of how I would DJ an open format night live. Going from Solo into Yeah 3 Times, one of my favorite tracks to play at the end. Best Love Song, one of my favorite tracks to play at the end. Big Jump, I think Yeah 3 Times is around 130 or 132 BPM. Best Love Song going into 140. Right above it, around 150. But these are some of my favorite tracks. Even right above it is a track that I would end with, but most of the time, if everything lined up perfectly, I would probably end with I Got a Feeling, which is one of the times where I break my rules, where I go from 150 or so to 124 BPM. But this is just a perfect example of how I would end a night with, and I have ended nights with this track that I just had to include it, right? It's a good slow, it's good emotion. It really captures the essence of I had a great night. So I just had to end with this track, even though it was a big jump, because that's something I would do live. I mean, I Got a Feeling is just a great track to end with. Emotional, slow, recognizable, popular, and has the right, literally lyrics and feeling of, hey, that was a great night. Let's do it again. All right, and that was it. So real quick, I want to highlight some of my favorite transitions, because if there are any open format DJs watching this video, I mean, all the way into, I don't know what minute we're on. Let's say I've been recording for 53, so maybe minute 45 after I edit or so. If there are any DJs watching this, I want to highlight some of my favorite transitions, because these are ones that I think would work live, and not only would work live, but they're cool, unique transitions that you could use on your own. So let's get to it. Right off the bat, you have some simple ones. A milli, bottoms up into a milli is a really solid transition. It's not crazy. It's not crazy good. It's not crazy unique, but this is pretty solid. If you're an open format DJ, this should work pretty well. Even Que Mal Te Fue into Rude Boy isn't half bad. This Rude Boy into Just a Dream I really like. Again, all these tracks kind of work here. This is How We Do It into Backstreet's Back is a really nice transition, especially if you kind of have, an 80s or 90s moment going on. This would work really well. One Dance into Boomaye works mostly well. I think this is a good transition because One Dance is an English song that with a reggaeton beat that works really well into reggaeton tracks. It just doesn't happen to be in the key of a lot of the tracks that I have in my library. A lot of reggaeton tracks in my library are in. So Boomaye works well. I'm a really big fan of this Middle Child to Wet transition. This is something that won't necessarily work live per se, because I don't know how well Wet works live. But let's get into the better ones here. These three work pretty smoothly together, and even Scream into Evacuate the Dance Floor is a really good transition. They kind of work, the endings work together really well. That this is something you can be pretty confident you can play. Even Time of Our Lives into Hello is a pretty solid transition. But I also want to showcase some more unique ones that aren't basic. I mean, this is a pretty simple transition here that anyone could do. Scream to Evacuate the Dance Floor is a little bit more creative, so I did want to highlight that one, but let's highlight some different ones. In the Dark to Take Over Control is pretty unique. These tracks aren't played all that often, so I do want to highlight this one. You Are My Life into Barbra Streisand, that transition is just amazing in my opinion. Not just the transition, but the energy kind of gets matched really well from a peak moment to a straight into let's get back to dancing moment. If you wanted to do a Limbo Summer drop swap, you could, but I mean, there are some better ones out here. Monaco into Walk It Talk It is actually pretty good. I would highlight this. Even something like Umbrella into El Perdón is solid. I actually really like the El Perdón to Dirty Love transition, but again, if you don't play this track live, and if it doesn't work live, then you probably would refrain from playing it. Here are some of my favorite ones. Uproar into Staying Alive I think is really underrated. These are two tracks that are super far apart from one another, but the transition works so well. I mean, you scratch it in, that I think that this could actually genuinely work in an open format setting if you really wanted to switch things up and kind of be super creative, going from hip hop to an 70s or 80s track. Hypnotized into Say My Name is one of my favorite transitions of the mix. Two tracks that I probably wouldn't play live. I've played Say My Name live, and when the atmosphere is more chill and it's a little bit more empty. But this transition works really well. Feel So Close works pretty much with everything. And even something like rebound into solo works really well. I mean, yeah, 3 times is really easy to transition into. And that's probably right around it. I'm sure there are more that I can't think of off the top of my head unless I'm listening to them. But I did want to highlight more of the creative ones and not just it works well. All right, so that about has it. I am 57 minutes into recording, so I hope that just goes to show how much I like to talk about these things. I also like to be super descriptive about everything I talk about. I'm sure you've picked that up on my previous videos. And if not, you definitely picked it up on this one. But again, I like talking about these things. I like sharing my thought process. And I really just want to inspire more people into what they do. And hopefully you've picked up, maybe a thing or two on how you might want to make your mixes. Especially, hopefully, something along one of these characteristics that I strongly believe in and that I will almost always include in my mixes. And of course, last but not least, this does apply to mostly, these actually apply to all of the genres I do, but this is an open format mix, so the rules might be a little bit different if I'm doing something where I'm more of my artist self, not my DJ self, but my producer self, where I'm doing, drum and bass, melodic bass. If I ever do a dubstep mix, those rules might look a little bit different. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Leave a comment if you happen to stay all the way at the end, and if you have any questions, make sure to listen to this open format mix if you haven't already. And last thing I want to say is this open format mix is also a really good option for just, bar owners or club owners that want some background music. Pretty much for free. This is on my Mixcloud, and it's 3 hours and 40 minutes of some really solid open format music that works well, in the background. If you ever have a full bar or a full club, maybe not club, but a full bar or a full restaurant that isn't necessarily dancing, but they are there, having a good time. This is available for anyone to use. 3 hours and 40 minutes is pretty long, so I think it'll cover most of the night, if not all of the night. If you're a bar owner and you want something that's played in the background, I think this is a really solid option. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos like this where I break down what I do, and thank you for watching.